Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my session to discuss the new Florida writing standards and how they will be scoring the writing assessments the 4th and 5th graders will take this year. When I attended the State Department meeting on October 31st, 2014, I was given a set of information to bring back to the school to explain the new state testing for writing. One of the first things asked to do was to write an essay based on a prompt given, and we were allowed 45 minutes to complete our essays. This was a very eye-opening experience, and as I was writing, I used the instructional strategies I teach students to use, and I felt I wrote a strong, informative essay. But when we were finished and we were given the new rubric, I scored really low because it did not follow the guidelines for the new standards. So then, as a group, we had to think about how teachers are teaching writing on a school-wide level. After this discussion, our group reflected on how our school was performing towards the new writing standards. As a result of these changes, we also discussed the implications that this would have on the future outcomes of students, all the way from the primary level to high school. Our elementary group was relieved to hear that argumentative essays do not start until 6th grade. Before we discuss what we're doing right or wrong, or even what the standards are, there's one basic fact everyone needs to keep in mind. The fact is that every single one of us are learning the English language, even as adults. Even teachers cannot write perfect essays, so students need to feel comfortable making mistakes. I tell my students every time I make a mistake that I'm not perfect, and as mistakes allow me to grow and learn more. As far as the importance of writing, in the real world, 70% of our communication is in writing. Think about the last time you communicated with your colleagues. Did you yell down the hall? Probably not. Was it by email? By text message? More than likely, it was probably not face-to-face. Even though our students are practicing more spoken communication in the elementary setting, as they become adults, the form of communication will shift more into writing. Even before you apply for a job, you have to complete an application that requires writing. So even though you may have English language learners in your classroom, that doesn't mean that they can't learn the same way as every other child in your room. Because remember, we are all learning the English language. So going back to our discussion I had with my group after we finished our writing prompt, we reflected how our school was performing. At our school, I discussed how we're already practicing how to summarize because we do this with the Dr. Collier reading program. Another thing students were able to do was looking back at text evidence. In our school, we use text evidence in all subject areas. And again, in the Dr. Collier program, they're required to look back on their story to find where they found their answer during the oral discussion of the story. Our students are also very strong at making a plan for writing, and in fact, most of them do it before they even read the prompt. The problem is that they don't know what to plan. Most of our students have a general sense of typing, however, they can't type quickly or accurately. Our students also use basic sentence structure, such as they know where to put periods and capital letters. However, complex sentences are not commonly used. Our students can also read and understand text, but only on their instructional level. So as a school, what does that tell us? Do you feel we're teaching at the level we should be? If not, where is the most important area for us to improve? At the end of the session, we'll come back to this question and decide what plan of action will be best so that our students can be successful. So as you're looking at the new standards and rubric, you will see that there's some skills that students obviously need to know. One of the most important things they need to know is how to paraphrase, not summarize. Personally, I recall learning this skill in college. However, students as early as 4th grade need to know this skill by the end of their school year. Students also need to understand how to read information from a text and synthesize it. This is related to citing evidence. However, this skill is one step beyond citing evidence. As you know, synthesis is the highest skill in the cognitive domain for Bloom's taxonomy. Students should also know what a 10 looks like. To achieve this, teachers should use the rubric whenever they are teaching writing to show that what they are expected to achieve in order to score 10. Organization structure should be taught explicitly and reinforced every time a student writes an essay. ESOL students should refer to their ESOL translator, but our students are pretty good at doing this anyway. When you think about citations, as teachers, we need to help them by using the term habit of mind in our head. What habit of mind means is that whenever we're teaching and refer back to the text or any source, we need to use the terms according to this article or based on this story. If we model in the correct way and cite every day, then our students are more likely to use it in their own writing. The last thing students need to know is the audience. This is something we've talked about in the past, however, we have not talked about it in depth. Whenever students read the prompt, they need to know how to distinguish between prompts that are for general audiences and academic audiences. Typically, prompts with an opinion will be for a general audience, and prompts that explain or inform the reader have an academic audience. If you look at your handouts, you will see that I've given you the new writing rubric, which was labeled final as of October 31st, 2014. You will see the rubric is divided into 3 main categories, and the students can earn a total of 10 points. The first column focuses on the purpose, focus, and organization of the student's writing. The student can earn up to 4 points in this category. The second column focuses on evidence and elaboration. Students can earn up to 4 points for this column as well. The last column focuses on conventions of standard English, where students can earn up to 2 points. After evaluators read the student's writing, they will award points based on each of the 3 categories. The sum will be the student's final score. Something that the FSA department emphasized was that students must address the topic to receive a score. In the past, students could receive points in other categories, even if they didn't address the topic. However, that has definitely changed. If a student does not address the topic, they will receive a score of unscorable, which is a 0, no points. And they will not receive any points for any other categories as well. So let's look at the rubric to see how it's divided into roots and bullets. So if you look and see, the root is the big part in the box, and the bullets are the small little points underneath the rubric. The root weighs heavier than the bullet point because the bullet point is just describing the quality of the writing, and the root is the goal. This was the most difficult for people to understand at the meeting. The information they wanted to convey is that the bullet point should be a guide to your instruction, but the root is the big goal. So let's focus a little bit on purpose, focus, and organization. As we know from our writing standards, students will be addressed on either an opinion prompt or an informational prompt. If the prompt is an opinion, it is extremely important that they should directly state their opinion. If the person reading the paper cannot clearly say what the person's opinion is, then it's not clear. It's okay for students to use the words I, me, or we. However, students should refrain from convincing the reader and focus just on stating their opinion. When they move to middle school, that will change. It's also important for students to know that opinion texts are more for general audiences, and informational texts are written on a more complex level that will require academic language. And since students can use the text whenever they're writing, it is emphasized that they go and find those key words in the text to help them with that academic language if they're writing an informational text. Now let's look at the second column, evidence and elaboration. As teachers, this can be the hardest column to teach because it's unlike what we have taught in the past. Students will be required to be very specific with their language. Most students will say things like stuff or something, and that's just not acceptable. Whenever we teach students, we need to focus on language and not just writing. So what is evidence and elaboration? How are you supposed to explain it to the student? The easiest way to explain this is that evidence is from the text and elaborations are from the student. When the student mixes the citations with their own words, that is called synthesis. Since my class has mostly visual learners, I used an unconventional method to help them understand synthesizing. I had them use peanut butter and jelly, and I told them we were going to make a sandwich. So on one piece of bread, I told them to spread their peanut butter, and that's going to be referred to as the text. And then on a separate piece of bread, I asked them to spread their grape or strawberry jelly, which I referred to as elaboration. I then asked them if they had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And of course, still the peanut butter and jelly were separated. It wasn't put together. Some of my students said yes, and some said no. So we had a class discussion about why we did or did not have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Eventually, we came to the conclusion that no, we do not have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich yet. The students can easily explain that to make the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you have to put those two slices of bread together. When you put them together, the peanut butter and jelly will mix together. I explained to them to synthesize, they have to mix their evidence and elaboration together. So whenever you are teaching evidence and elaboration, the most important part is to help them understand how the two are separate, but also how they put it together. So now let's move forward and look at the last column, which is conventions. This area is one of the hardest for both students and teachers to overcome. Have you ever had a student that couldn't decide what to write because they said they didn't know how to write it? This is one example of why the State Department did not want conventions to weigh as heavily as other areas. Students should be able to write for communication, and when a student cannot communicate because they're afraid of conventions, then it impedes the student from moving forward. So students should still be learning correct sentence structure and grammar, because that goes along with their language standards. The most points that they can achieve in this area in conventions are 2 points. That means that they know most sentence structures and grammar, and they have very few errors. Now, if they score 1 point, that means they have a pattern of incorrect usage with grammar, structure, and verb tense. However, it does not interfere with the meaning of the essay. The only way a student can get a 0 is if the evaluator cannot understand anything the student is trying to communicate. Again, let me emphasize, this does not mean that conventions are not important. It just means that the State Department is more interested in the students' ideas rather than having perfect conventions. So now look at the 2 writing examples that you have in front of you. These were both provided by the State Department. The prompt was, give your opinion about whether Alaska State Parks or Florida State Parks are the best to visit. The students were also given a brochure that advertised 3 state parks in each state. I'll give you a minute to read the first essay. All right, after reading the essay, I want you to think about how you would score this paper. You're going to use your rubric that I've already given you, and I want you to look at the 4 different point boxes. So how would you score purpose, focus, and evaluation or organization? Do they have evidence and elaboration? What about their conventions? So while thinking about how you would score it, let's look to see how the State Department scored their writing. For purpose, focus, and organization, they gave this student 2 points. State Department said that there was not an intended audience and the organization of ideas were not clear. For evidence and elaboration, they gave 2 points because the student did not use proper citing or synthesizing. So for this student, the teacher could provide more guidance on how to elaborate, and a technique that was recommended for teaching evidence and elaboration was the ACE technique. This is an instructional strategy to help students see that they need to answer, cite, and explain whenever they are writing. And for conventions, they scored a perfect score, which is 2. However, that did not help the student pass, so their total score would be a 6.